Going live.
Welcome, everyone. We have 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I don't know about Central Standard Time, but we have 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am, as you know, a military brat and a band nerd, so I try my best to start on time, but I do want to give people a little bit of time to trickle on in the room. It is great to see your smiling faces. I see some new people. I see some familiar faces. It's very, very good to see you. Very good to see you. Welcome to Drop-In Hours. We're excited to share this Wednesday evening with you. This day is for you, this evening is for you, and this session is for you. This is the second session of 4 in this series, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But do want to thank all of the people that you do not see behind the screen who are on our team, who are partners and who are supporters of this work that made this day, these days, possible. So thank you for making this event available and accessible to the communities who need a little bit of cayenne pepper, a little bit of Texas Pete or habanero on their messaging to bring a little innovation to the prevention space. We know people are fatigued with COVID. They are tired of hearing vaccines. They're tired of hearing inequity. This is a space that you can come and ask your real deal questions about what's going on with the pandemic. As you know, things are changing so much. I do want to also celebrate 2 amazing speakers who will introduce themselves in a second. And we were not intentional about this being an intergenerational, multi-generational panel, but this is exciting that we have people who literally run the spectrum from babies to our babies at spirit on the other side of the spectrum. I do want to acknowledge, I know that this pandemic has been very painful for many. It has been challenging for many, and we know that we have lost over 600,000 lives. And I do want to acknowledge those souls that have been lost. I want to acknowledge the people on the front lines who are working so hard and so diligently to make sure that we get out of this and make sure that we have a glimmer of hope. And so, making sure I do everything here, I want to remind you or to inform some of you, we will be doing simultaneous translation of this session today. So nuestros amigos y amigas y familia de Carolina Norte o otros estados o otros países, bienvenidos. So we will have this session in English. And if you look at the bottom right of your screen, there's a little globe if you would like to listen in Spanish. And so we all are a part of historically marginalized and oppressed populations that are all being disproportionately affected by this pandemic. Members of my team said, mi gente need to be a part of these conversations. And so because of them, we were able to make this happen. So I do want to pause for a moment and allow our interpreter to come in and share a little bit more about what interpretation will look like. And then we will jump into drop-in hours.
Yes, good evening. This is Angie, one of your interpreters for this evening, and please bear with us while we make a quick announcement in Spanish for Spanish-speaking folks to be able to connect to the interpreting services. Hola, muy buenas noches. Esta noche estaremos ofreciendo servicios de interpretación a español. En la pantalla aparecen las instrucciones, pero es muy sencillo. Si está en un computador, encontrará un icono redondo de un mundo, presione este botón y luego elija español como su idioma y luego tiene la opción, si gusta, de silenciar el audio original. Si están en un teléfono o una tableta, la forma que encontrarán la opción de interpretación es abajo a mano derecha, encontrarán 3 puntitos, presione esos 3 puntitos, luego se irá a Language Interpretation, luego elija su idioma, o sea, español. Ahora, aparecen 2 español, por favor elijan solamente el primer español que aparece en sus opciones y luego ponga done para finalizar. Cualquier problema que tengan, por favor nos dejan saber en el chat y que disfruten la reunión. Thank you. I have gone ahead and made the announcement about interpreting services in Spanish.
All right. So I hope everyone is on the same flight, going to the same destination today to learn more about this pandemic that we've all been in for the past year and a half. I have not introduced myself, so you don't even know who you're talking to right now. I'm Dr. Bobby Banks. I'm one of the visionaries on the team that is leading not only drop-in hours, but a larger multimedia effort known as Not a Host. Just just as the people we have in this room and the people that we have seen impacted by this pandemic, we're multi-generational. People who are 20 years old to 70 plus years old. And we started off this campaign to be in the very space we are right now. Like, let's shoot messaging to the people with a little bit of cayenne on it to help them understand this pandemic in a different way. I'll be very clear on what this space is about. It's about providing information for you to make informed decisions. We are not persuading, we are not pushing, we are not guilting people into anything. We are providing experts to come to you in your living room, in your car, wherever you are, to share information so that you have factual, sound data, whatever, to making a decision about your vaccine, if that is an option for you. So this is not a space where we are doing that. So we have experts here today that are going to share more about that. This campaign has been pushed across social media for the past year and has been complemented by a print campaign. And so pretty much what you see on the Not a Host website is also available in print. But why we are here is because we had the support of the community and we had support of partners who saw the value of providing a space where we could talk about this in a very transparent and honest way. So we're here for you to answer your questions about what's been going on for the past year and a half. So this session drop-in hours is very, very simple. The concept is we want experts to drop in, which they're doing. They're coming to your living rooms. We want them to drop their credentials. I have a lot of expertise and a lot of science that ends in ology, but this pandemic was even challenging for me to navigate. And so I had to really peel back and say, well, who has actually studied this? Who has credentials to tell us about this? So they'll drop their credentials and then they will drop knowledge. They're going to share a little bit of information with you. So there'll be a little bit of classroom feel, a little bit of kick your feet back living room feel. And then I invite you to type your questions in the chat and we'll answer your questions in real time. So we're asking them to drop in, drop their credentials, drop knowledge. And then the very last thing we ask them to do, if you are of the same generation of me and watched the Oscar-worthy movie Coming to America, the last thing that Randy Watson did was drop the mic. And so dropping the mic is almost like a call to action for the people in the room. That was just one thing we want you to walk away with as a result of being in this room. So that is drop-in hours. And all of this was made possible as part of the Ride United NC program, which many of you know, this pandemic is a systems and structures issue. We talked about that last month with Dr. Riley and Dr. Barber. We can, point at individuals and say, we're waiting for you to do this, but if there are larger barriers that prevent you from getting to where you need to be, or for you to be healthy, then we need to change the system. And one of the barriers that we know is prevalent, not only in the midst of a pandemic, but for so many every day, is transportation. So as part of this campaign, Ride United NC, they're offering round trip travel for people who have made the informed decision to get a vaccine if it is an appropriate, decision for them to make. And so thank them and all of the sponsors and partners that you see on the slide there for the opportunity to serve in this way in the midst of a time that's been very, very difficult for so many. And I don't even know what people's personal experiences have been in the midst of the pandemic, but thank you for the opportunity to serve. And we'll have more information about how you can learn about this entire effort at the end of the presentation. So that said, who do we have dropping in today? We have two phenomenal people who I have watched not only in the midst of the pandemic, but way before. This work is not new to any of us. We have been dedicated and passionate about equity our entire careers. And I could not think of two better people to bring into the room than Dr. Teresa Chapple-McGruder and Dr. Delon Canterbury. We have their bios. That's cute. We know their credentials, but we would love for you to drop in and just whoever wants to go first, let the people know who you are. Drop your credentials, and then we'll jump into the first round of Q&A because we do have your questions from last time, and we will be asking them. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Teresa Chapple-McGruder. I hold PhDs in maternal and child health and in epidemiology. I am what's called a perinatal and pediatric epidemiologist. So that means that I focus on anything that can happen from the moment that a person gets pregnant all the way through pregnancy and up through childhood. For me, I define childhood up to age 12 is kind of where my expertise lies. And I really am addressing any type of health issues that can occur during that time and looking for ways to prevent it, looking for ways to mitigate harm, and looking at disparities that occur between racial groups and socioeconomic status.
Okay.
Oh, I'm also currently a local health department director. And so the work that I am doing, I research it and I also put it into practice within my community.
Okay. So when we say so-and-so loves the kids, you love the kids. You started your career with the babies. And then you also, one of the things I asked Dr. Rowley last time, I said, how happy are you that people finally understand what epidemiology actually means? So folks at least know that we're in a pandemic as part of an epidemic that got too big. And so you love the kids. And you have this expertise in data or epidemiology or studying epidemics. And so you've been doing this, this work. All right, thanks for dropping in and dropping your credentials. Dr. Canterbury, give it to us.
All right, and a warm hello to you all. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Dr. Bobby Banks. And so honored to be here today. And just so you know who I am a clinical pharmacist by trade. And honestly got a bit burned out in the retail setting. And so I now serve as the founder of Geriatrics, which is a medication de-prescribing company where we help families get off of meds that they do not need. In addition to that, I've found myself in this line of work in health equity while serving as a part of the African American COVID Task Force based here in Durham. And so we've put our efforts in trying to dispel COVID myths, misinformation, and making sure resources are shared amongst our community members, our faith-based leaders, and of course, our healthcare institutes. That being said, it is a complete honor to be here. I do have a specialty in geriatric pharmacy, so I have helped families get off of meds and save money while improving some of their health outcomes. Really, my passion in getting into this line of health equity came from my family members pretty much confused and lost on where to go about vaccinations. And so that spearheaded me into this line of just trying to dispel the truths and get the word out there. So I'm completely honored to be here and honestly just excited for tonight.
Mm-hmm. And you're very humble. You also have been out in this sweltering heat. You're not new to this. You have been out rolling up your sleeves and I don't know if community pharmacist is even a term, but I see Delon more on the street than I do on the internet. So we talk about grassroots work, whether it's testing or tracing or whatever. Dr. Canterbury is out there on the ground. So Dr. Teresa loves the kids. Dr. Canterbury loves the kids at heart, or seasoned saints on the, okay. And so you guys kind of run the spectrum or the continuum of this work. Thank you for dropping in. So I want to, because this is a space for the folks, I would love to start off by kicking it off with the questions that people asked, because that's what we're here to do. And so at the end of our last session, we sent out a survey and we asked folks, what else do you want to know? Because this is for you. And these are some of the questions that we got. So we'll kick off with a quick round robin and y'all could tag team or however you want to do it. And then we would love to hear from you from the perspective of, because we know folks are tired, right? Exhausted in knowing all this, but some of the important information for folks to at least know as they're going on with their daily lives and as they're taking care of loved ones, just what they need to know, because I'm a huge proponent of making informed decisions and not just making it off of somebody who slept at a Holiday Inn last night. So first question we have is, people have been seeing on social media that viruses are going to virus. What does this mean? Or have you heard this and what does this mean? If not, I can expand more, but I have seen it. I've actually said it as well.
That's actually one of my favorite things to say during the pandemic is that the virus is going to virus. And what I mean when I say that is that we um, we need to understand what viruses do and the way that viruses work. And we need to know that as long as there's a host, the virus is going to virus. As long as we give the virus the opportunity to move from person to person, it will do just that. And so we can't pretend um, like the virus cares about the fact that we're tired. The virus doesn't care about the fact that we want to go back to work or we want to go back to school. The virus cares about the fact that it has a host and an opportunity to continue to move along and spread throughout the population. The virus is going to virus also means that the virus is going to mutate. That's what viruses do. And so we have to know that as long as we continue to give the virus opportunity, then it's going to do exactly what it should do. And that that it's up to us to stop the virus. It's not going to stop on its own. So if we continue to have a population that's at risk, then the virus will spread and the virus will mutate.
Okay. So, or do you have anything to add, Dr. Canterbury?
Perfectly said, honestly.
Okay. So I've been talking to different groups over the past couple of weeks who are on the spectrum. And we know that there are folks who want to get vaccinated, can't get access, and there are folks who are just not. There's a spectrum of people. That is life. Just making sure that they have the best information in terms of prevention is so key and so important. And one of the things I said was, I'm always aging myself, but I said there's a wonderful cartoon with the comic named Robin. And the kid said, you know, we don't die, we multiply. And so viruses are looking for a host, a warm body, ticking heart. That is how they continue to replicate themselves. That's what they're looking for. And that is a host, right? And because they are out here, there, and everywhere, they're going to continue to mutate. And so that's what they do. And I have posted that as well, that viruses are going to virus. They're going to continue replicating, searching for a host, and they're going to mutate because there are different people, they adapt to make sure that they can still multiply in different hosts. So that's one question. And if you have other questions today, this is for you. Please drop them in the chat as well. Is this vaccine a one-time thing, or will folks need a booster shot if they have chosen to get a vaccine?
I'll be happy to take that.
Thank you, our resident pharmacist.
Right. So, you know, it's a question I get way too often, and I honestly have the very same one. The truth is, our current vaccines work so well that we may not need it in the immediate future. The truth is, though, Big Pharma, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, they're all working on boosters as we speak. So they're trying to get ahead of the curve whenever the next wave of mutations may occur, which means that basically the virus changed and got a little bit better at surviving, as Dr. Banks mentioned earlier. The truth is, I initially thought this would be a yearly booster like we see with the flu shots, but the evidence is pointing to the fact that it may be actually a couple of years out. It may be 3, 5, or even 10, but we currently do not have a strong answer to know what the timeline will be. We do know it'll be unlikely to be a yearly shot that you may get, but again, that's still to be determined. But we will have boosters in the future, and we're looking like some data may actually come out in the fall about more of that.
Okay. And so folks are seeing a lot on the news, like what we do know about the vaccine. What don't we know about the vaccine? Either one of you can answer, or both.
All of the above. I mean, honestly.
With the mutations, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we don't know. And so literally by the day, by the week, we're getting new information. I'm finding a study that just came out that, 25% of people who have had COVID may have long-term effects. I'm seeing another study saying that there's a link to that fact that the COVID cells may attack certain cells needed for diabetes. And so that leads to basically a pseudo type 1 diabetes with people who have had COVID. And so we're finding new information about what the long-term issues are with this. So, and again, that's why I mentioned all of the above, because there's so much we don't know. And so the community, the medical community just has to be really humble about everything, because we're finding out more and more info. But Dr. Chapel, what are your thoughts on that?
I just want to add and say that not just the medical community, but also the population at large. Like, what I want you guys to know is that we are doing our best to learn about this virus. We're doing our best to stay ahead of this virus, but there are things that we don't know. And there are things that we might have thought were true that we need to now change because we've learned more. So what I don't want people to take away from that is that we don't know what we're doing. That's not the case. The case is that we are learning as we go. We're getting smarter and better at knowing this virus as we go. But we didn't come into this 18 months ago knowing all there is to know about COVID. It was novel to you as it was novel to us. What we have is that we have a basis of science. We have a basis of understanding. We have a basis of how epidemics work and how viruses work. And we're taking that basis and we're moving forward from there. So we're not starting from scratch, but there are times when we thought we knew something and then we look back and go, oh, well, that wasn't actually, it didn't work exactly like we thought it would. We may have gotten that 75% correct, but not 100% correct. But what I don't want you to think is that everything that you heard was wrong because there was a piece that needed to be tweaked. That's not the case. And it is going to be how we move forward. We're going to be doing our best science, and at the same time knowing that things that we come up with today might need to be tweaked in 6 months.
And being researchers, like having controlled settings and doing experiments with like plants or with like things that are not as mobile as human beings and not as adaptive as human beings is very, very different. Where you have millions of people on the move doing all these different things and all these different variables. That's part of the reason I slung myself in the house very quickly at the beginning. And Dr. Rowley was saying last time, an epidemic curve, this is how they work. This is why it's called an epidemic curve. The infection does this when viruses if they are novel or flu season, it does this until there is a preventive measure and it tapers out. And then we talk about flattening the curve, which I know you guys will talk about. One more question, and this might be, Teresa, a good way to possibly segue to clinical trials, because folks, or Dr. Canterbury, folks think that this is a new vaccine. The first thing that I saw when the vaccine came out, and I do acknowledge that all of us were like, wait a minute, when it came out. But the first thing that I saw was that it was in a phase 3 trial. And I've taken courses in clinical trials and I know how they roll. But for someone who asks, like, is this vaccine new or it's too new? How would you explain that to like a 6-year-old in terms of clinical trials?
So one of my favorite things to do is to explain clinical trials to young children. I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they are awesome at explaining it because that's what I do often. So just to give like a really quick overview is that the way clinical trials work, and I think I have a slide about this, so I might just put it up at the end just to give you a reminder of what I'm saying right now. But the way that clinical trials work is that you have the preclinical trials, the science that happens in labs, the thoughts and everything else that goes along with this. But when the time we are ready to get to clinical trials, we tend to start with phase 1. And phase 1 is just a few people. And with phase 1, we're just looking to see, like, is there any major harm? And then we go to phase 2, where we're looking to see, is this able to work? So when we go into phase 3, we're looking at large groups that we're trying to figure out how the vaccine will work in terms of safety, in terms of efficacy, in terms of any types of side effects and things that we think we could see. And this is with larger groups of people. It tends to be around like in your thousands, like 1,000 to kind of 3,000 people is what we're looking when we do phase 3 trials. And then once we get there and we've studied the vaccine or studied whatever the medication or vaccine is that we're looking at, we start to then go through FDA approval, where we're trying to now show our data to the FDA, say, this is what we found. Can this be something that we do large scale? And then once that approval happens, we move it to phase 4 of the clinical trial, which I think is something that people don't talk about often, which is that this is now when we have released that medication or vaccine to larger groups of people. And we're actually looking to see, is there something that we couldn't pick up when we had the smaller groups earlier? Are there any concerns that we need to now see? And what you have seen happen, and I feel like science has been on display this last year. So what you've seen happen a few times is that there have been pauses. So we've had a pause with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and said, okay, after we've now put it out to this larger group of people, we've now seen that there is a few little kinks that we want to investigate a little closer. We want to see what this side effect is looking like, and if this is a reason to either stop it altogether, is this a reason to add more nuance to the vaccine as we move forward. And that's what we've seen happen, and actually the change that we were able to make with Johnson & Johnson, as we started to notice that there were some issues with, I can't think of the letters now.
Adverse side effects, yeah.
Yes, okay, related to it. And so what we have done is put some more language in there so that people can make informed consent and say, if you are within this age bracket, maybe there's a concern for, there's concerns that you need to be thinking about as we move forward. So there's opportunity kind of all along the way to always continue to assess safety, to continue to assess efficacy, and then to take that information and make sure that we're giving it back out to the public so that we can continue to make informed consent along the way. And I am really appreciative of these real-time science lessons that the whole world gets to see, so that you can know the way that science works, and that you can know that that we are consistently and constantly looking at any potential adverse events or side effects. And this is what happens for all vaccines kind of as we go. There's a database that the CDC tracks, and that HRSA, Health Resources and Services Administrations, they also track any potential things that happen with any vaccines, and then continue to put out new information and educate the public and medical professionals about what to do and ways to really handle and address these concerns as we move forward.
People express that they aren't sure what's in the vaccine, including microchips and 5G. What do you say to those people?
Great question. So if you want to really break down what are in these vaccines, to be honest, most of it is water. So you have water, you have usually a small weakened piece of the virus or bacteria that you're trying to protect against, in this case, COVID. And so what they do is they inactivate it, and they don't give you a live virus at all in these vaccines. What they do is make a lab-based form of it to teach your body how to learn the cheat code for COVID. And so when your body learns that cheat code, it builds an army, and it's able to fight off COVID the next time it sees it. So in the actual vaccine, a lot of it are preservatives, water, those inactive pieces of the code for the virus, not the actual virus, and some salts. And so even so, that's why a lot of these have to have strict temperature regulations. And when it dissolves, you basically mix with some sterile water and you get an injection following that. So a lot of myths do circulate about the chips and 5G, et cetera. Just so you all know, there were chips in the box for some of these vaccines because they were being tracked and regulated really for quality assurance. They want to make sure they're getting to and fro safely within the right temperature. And because in the beginning, these were vital life-saving drugs, the government wanted some extra eyes on them. And so they did have tracking devices for the boxes, but there was nothing electronic at all in the vaccine.
Okay, that makes sense. And thank you for clarifying that, because if someone just said they're microchips, well, they were in the box to track them. And what's very interesting, someone has a question, and then we can jump into, I see people putting their thumbs up. Clarity is everything. I was with a friend last week, and I have friends who are vaccinated. I have friends who do not want to get vaccinated. We still have conversations. And one of them was saying, I don't understand what's in it and all this. And I said, those are important questions to ask. And then this person had a box of Cheez-Its. And so I turned over the box of Cheez-Its and I said, well, what's sodium bicarbonate, right? And just started naming things. And I said, and I think it is always important to have legitimate questions, but I think we need to be clear on the questions that we ask. And if there's a barometer for, or a level at which we say, or, we need to be consistent. If you flip over some of the stuff you eat or some of the things you drink or put in your skin or your hair or your nails, it's very important to think about consistency and very important to make sure that you have clarity on that. So thank you for sharing that information. So I'm going to ask the group, you can do your action. We can either keep going with questions or we can let the presenters go into their slides. I'm scared to give access to anything because, whoa, where's Zoom jail? Your reactions are on the bottom right of the screen. It's a smiley face with a plus. If you would like to continue asking questions, do a thumbs up. Okay, I see one. Is there one? There is two. There is three. There is four. Okay, 4, 5. Can I get 5, 5, 5, 5, get a 6, 6. Okay. If you would like the speakers to go into their presentations, give us a thumbs up.
Dejar que los presentadores.
Okay, we'll go with 2 more questions and then we'll let them go into their presentations. All right, so I have another question here. Well, Dr. Canterbury, somebody wanted you to clarify preservatives, and that's what I was just talking about with the foods and things and the scrutiny we're putting on some things and not others. But tell us about preservatives.
Yeah, preservatives are basically what keep our drugs stable. And so you don't want a drug that's just going to last a day the minute you put it on the shelf or out the fridge. And what the preservatives do is to maintain the integrity of what you're getting. So we actually use a lot of preservatives when it comes to vaccines in order for them to have a longer life in the fridge or freezer, wherever it's kept. Now, preservatives, we're not talking like thimerosal, which is a mercury-based product. None of them seem to have that. But there are preservatives with long names, like Bobby was saying earlier, that are just, it comes down to the science of what they do. And a lot of what they do is just make sure it's safe, it's quality. They're generally harmless in the body. And honestly, they just tend to just keep things fresh. So that's really the bottom line of how I'll get into it. I don't want to get too much into the long names because it ends up just being whatever. So.
And what I learned because, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that they're just necessary to keep things safe.
And that's what I was trying to drive home to my friend. I was like, they're in everything. Unless you have a garden in your backyard and you freeze immediately, they're everywhere. But that is important. That's a very important question to ask. Folks got questions coming in. All right. Wow. Folks have left the church. They're tired of talking about vaccines, and people have the Delta variant. I'm just going to read the question as it is. People have left my church because they're tired of me talking about getting the vaccine. And I don't want to wait until they get the Delta variant for them to get it. Any suggestions or advice? And to me, this gets around informed decision-making. Like, what would you recommend to people knowing all of the things we have going on right now? We have the original novel coronavirus. We got the vaccines that were phase 3 clinical trials. Dr. Kizzy and crew have been working on this for almost a decade. Mutations, variants, economy is back opened. How do you help people understand, or what will help them make an informed decision in your experience, or what you would hope would help them make an informed decision? because we're now, if people aren't familiar with the variants, they're naming them after Greek letters. And so we're on the 4th variant, which is Delta. And as long as we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Canterbury, as long as we have folks who are unvaccinated, or we have not just brought down the prevalence of COVID in the population, we'll continue to have variants. So we'll continue to go through the alphabet. Okay. So they started naming them after Greek letters, and we're on the 4th letter so far, the 4th variant. So what do you tell the folks in church? Because, and I've said this several times, like, which system do we tell people to trust? Every time we turn on the TV, it's a system that's like the educational system, the health system, the legal system. My goal is like to tell people to trust themselves and to trust science, which is why we have this room. But it sounds like this person in this church is fatigued like all of us, or these people in the church are fatigued like all of us and may not have the best information in terms of risk reduction. That's really what it's about, risk reduction. So Dr. Chapple-McGruder or Dr. Canterbury, what would you say, knowing that this Delta variant is coming and it's transmitted at a higher rate? And I don't want to misspeak on it. I just know the transmission rate from person to person is higher.
Dr. Chapel, looks like you wanted to go ahead.
It looks like you're on mute, but girl, you look like you're saying some good stuff.
Okay, good. I was saying I can't unmute, but thank you. You guys have fixed it for me. So I'm going to say this is something I deal with a lot, working at a local community level as a health department director. And one of the things that I want to remind people of, and I go into this a little bit in my presentation, is that vaccines are a great approach to ending the pandemic. Vaccines are not the only approach to ending a pandemic. And so there have been countries that have made it to what we call COVID zero, really pretty much eliminated COVID in their countries and in their communities prior to the vaccine even being made available. And so one thing that I want us to remember is that the approach that we've taken in America hasn't really been an elimination approach. We haven't really tried our best to like never have COVID. That's not what our goal was. Our goal started with flatten the curve. Our goal was never let's eliminate COVID. And because of these things, the places where we've put our priorities have been different than what other countries have done. And so we're putting all of our eggs right now in the vaccination basket. And I think vaccinations are great. I think they're amazing. Vaccinations are pretty much the crux of public health. It's what kind of made my field and made my profession. So don't take this as me saying, like, poo-poo the vaccines. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that vaccinations are a great and amazing way out of the pandemic, but it's not the only way. And so if you have people in your community, if you have people in your circle, if you have people within your influence that really, really, really don't want to take the vaccine, ostracizing them is not the way to go. Shaming them is not the way to go. We need to provide education. And then we also need to talk about ways that they can stay safe during this time. We need to talk about mitigation measures. We need to talk about alternatives to vaccines that can also aid us in getting to the place where we have very low rates of COVID or no COVID in our community. And those ways are the things that we have known all along. Those have been mask, social distancing, avoid crowds, wash your hands, good ventilation. These are things that we can still do and things that we should still do to augment our approach of vaccination. We really don't need to be in a situation where we're only taking one approach. We don't need to be in all your eggs in one basket approach, because people are people, and people are as unique as we all are, and we're never going to get 100% of people to do anything ever. Mm-hmm. So the way that we need to address this really needs to be a solidarity approach. How can we take the science of the vaccines plus the science of NPI, non-pharmaceutical interventions, and really mesh them together to get to a place where we have extremely low or no COVID in our communities. This can be the conversations and discussions that we should be having, a way that honors where everyone is, while also providing education to bring other people along.
If folks are just dropping in, drop-in hours, welcome to the room. This conversation is happening in English and Spanish. So if you are a Spanish-speaking person, if you look at the bottom right of your screen and you see a little globe, if you click that, you can enter a separate room where you can get Spanish translation. We have, dropping in with us today, Dr. Teresa Chapple-McGruder, who loves the kids, maternal child health expert, who's also an epidemiologist, which means she's been crunching data and numbers from the beginning of this pandemic. What I did not also add, Dr. Chapple-McGruder, I'm on the internets a lot, guys, plural, internets with an S. And Dr. Chapple-McGruder has been consistent from the beginning of this pandemic. If you follow her on Twitter, she has spoken truth to power from day one about vaccines, about risk reduction, about informed decision-making. And I'm so glad you just said one more thing that I'm going to go back to, and someone put a heart on the screen, non-pharmaceutical interventions or other ways that people can combat this virus. Dr. Canterbury is on the other side. He also loves the kids, the ones who are just seasoned saints. They might have AARP cards or older, and is a pharmacist by training, and was very humble in his introduction. He's been down on the ground and the blazing heat over the course of this pandemic. I started off this room talking about the 600,000 lives that we have lost. We cannot lose anymore. And so we were intentional about bringing two people to the room who are doing the work. Now, Dr. Chapple and Dr. Canterbury, let's talk about immunity, right? We know that people who have other diseases or comorbidities, thinking about hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, the sugars, all of those things affect the extent to which your body can fight this virus, right? Or weaken your immunity. I'm not a clinician or a nurse, so correct me if I'm not correct. What bothered or what challenged me with this pandemic was we're not a healthy nation. So if we look at the data, what I thought was like, I think people think we're like Dora Milaje, and we're more like Dora and the Donuts. Like, we're not a healthy nation. But talk to us about the importance of immunity and being well, right? Because we do know that people who have been affected by this virus, they run the spectrum. They've been athletes, they've been old people, they've been obese people, and their outcomes have been very different. But in general, what are ways that are, as Dr. Chapple called them, NPIs, or other things that you're aware of? How can people fight off this virus, be healthy, be well? Because I know we thought this was an old people's disease at the beginning, but it's not quite. So talk to us more about immunity, wellness, or other ways that people can do all of these things to fight the virus. That's very long-winded, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, just starting off with some of the basics to overall wellness and health, and especially during these tough times, I want to highlight the importance of mental health and spiritual health, and just having a way to cope with the stressors day in, day out. We're getting bogged down with all types of negativity. And so I do want to make sure I challenge you to just try to see if there's a way that you can check the energy that you're letting into your space, because it can affect your overall day, your mood, and even the rest of your week. And that's been shown to contribute potentially for risk factors for depression and anxiety and other mental health issues. And so, one, talking about your concerns or fears or problems with a trusted health professional like a therapist can really just go huge lengths for your overall wellness and spirituality. And even if not that, just finding a way to meditate and just reflect on your day can do wonders. And that's relatively cheap if it comes down to, maybe meditating, or if it's prayer, or if it's talking to a close friend to get things off your chest. That could be almost free. And so that's one thing I want to highlight first and foremost. Two, try to control some of those chronic conditions, for instance, like high blood pressure or diabetes, with just lifestyle changes can do wonders for your body too. Exercising, getting some sunlight, these have been shown to not only help with your wellness, but hopefully control some of those chronic conditions that can lead, unfortunately, to worse outcomes if they have COVID. And so 30 minutes of walking a day, walk, jog, that can do wonders for your heart. And in fact, it protects your heart just getting a little bit of cardio in a day, which I know Dr. Banks likes to do. And so it's little changes in our habits that I feel can really go a long way. There have been some studies talking about getting some more vitamin D. We have been shown that vitamin D is linked to your immune strength and response. And so those who tend to be less in vitamin D, which historically are people of color, African Americans, tend to have lower vitamin D levels. It can help to get a little bit of sunlight, and if need be, potentially consider a vitamin D supplement. Again, that's something you want to still discuss with your provider and not just jump and get and think, let me take all this stuff like herbs and vitamins and suddenly I'm protected. The virus doesn't care. It's going to find a host. It doesn't matter how organic your diet is. Doesn't matter how fit you are. If you're in contact with someone in close proximity who has it and you're not vaccinated, there's a high risk of getting it. And so taking things preventatively are really the things you can start today. The behavioral changes, the habits, the good habits, and trying to control and maybe hopefully target some of those chronic conditions, for instance, like diabetes or obesity, which are risk factors, which means that they have a higher risk of having poorer outcomes if they have COVID, can go a long way.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you said that I get cardio. I appreciate whatever you think you see on the internet. What I do know is sunlight, vitamin D, right? Wellness, making sure your mind is right, making sure that you're trying your best to eat healthy things that feeds your body and keeps you strong. You're right. As we said earlier, this virus has two goals: to find a host and to replicate, like it's going to. Okay, so we're at 6:50. This is supposed to be 60 minutes, but we added more time on for people to ask questions. I'm going to let the speakers go into their presentations. Yeah, we'll do that. Flip a coin. Who wants to go first? Dr. Chapel or Dr. Canterbury, to drop your knowledge for the people? This is me every day, guys. This is because I got my vitamin D.
I say ladies first. Dr. Chapel, I'll let you take the wheel.
All right.
Sure. I think I gave you guys like all of my good points already.
Right. I'm like,
well, look, if the folks in the room want to keep questions going, we can. This is for them. So, I mean, I hate to take another poll, but we can do it again. If your reaction button is at the bottom right of your screen, there's an interpretation icon with a little globe. And then to the left of that, there's a reaction one. So I'm going to ask you two questions. We can continue to ask the experts questions in real time, or we can let them jump into their slides, which I've seen the slides and they have said a lot of what's in the slides. So if you want to go with continuing to ask them questions, hit your reaction button with the thumbs up. Oh, they want some knowledge from y'all today.
oh.
All right, if you want them to jump into their slides and you want to see some data and some points and some wisdom around their relative expertise, give us a thumbs up. All right, we got, oh, guys, you're making this tough. I think it's more for the second one. Yeah, it's more for the second one. Sorry, guys. I love PowerPoints too, but I love talking more. All right, Dr. Chapel, we'll let you take the floor. And folks, if you still have questions, I'm watching the chat. Continue to send them. And if we don't answer them today, we'll do exactly what we did today and bring them to the beginning of the next one. All right, Dr. Chapel, if we can give her a screen. I'm so scared to press anything. I have never, yeah. But if you can share her screen, we'll let you go and I'll go on mute.
Okay, let's see. Let me know when it's available for me to share screen.
Can you guys give her a thumbs up if you see her screen?
Not yet.
No, it's saying that it's disabled from you guys' side, I guess.
We need to make you a host. Not that host though, not a host. Not
You should be able to now, Dr. Chapel.
Okay. I am not.
All right, can we do it for her?
Yep.
All right, let's rock and roll. You can do the very fancy next slide, how people do that. Next slide. We could do one more question while we're transitioning here. Oh, this is a good one. And it's kind of like, I think I know the answer, but the vaccines that have been administered thus far, will they be effective against the variants and the mutations?
The good news is yes, at least so far. Looking at the data for Pfizer, after your second dose with that one, it's been shown to be about 88% effective, which is stellar against the Delta variant. In fact, a lot of the vaccines we have today do fairly well against the other variants, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta. So in the future, that's another question because we don't know what new mutation or new variant strain may come out. But we do know for now that they do pretty well against them.
I want to just add, and when I get to that point in my slide, I'll just skip it, that the Delta variant is really interesting because it does do well, where Pfizer does do well against the Delta variant, but after 2 doses. After the first dose alone, it does not do as well as we have seen with other variants. It's only at about like 35, 38% effective after the first dose. And this is one of the things that I'm particularly seeing in my community, which is that we have a high rate of people getting their first dose, but we also have a high rate of people not coming back in for their second dose. And I think that in the beginning, our data really pointed to like the first dose, you get really good protection. And then once you get your second dose, you get like awesome, amazing protection. And some people have decided that, really good is good enough for me. I don't need to come back for the second dose. And that's where we're seeing like a really big disparity between those people with the first shot and not coming back for the second. Somewhere around 40% aren't coming back for their second in my community. Mm-hmm. But this Delta variant is making it even more important to come back for your second shot because there is a major difference in how well at least Pfizer is working after 1 dose versus 2 doses with it. So if there's any people here who think, well, I'll just get the first dose, I won't get my second because I don't want those side effects and I don't want to, be in bed for 2 days, like it's worth risking, laying in bed and having a Netflix weekend to get your second dose than just kind of depending on your first dose to do all the work.
And what about the folks who aren't vaccinated? So we have the 1 shot, we have 2 shots. What about the folks who aren't vaccinated? Like, can you paint out for them as part of their decision-making? Either way, what does that look like for them with the Delta? I can't even go back with the Greek letters, but explain to them what risk looks like for them as well.
So with the Delta variant, we know that it is more easily transmissible. We also believe that it is more likely to be more severe. And so the Delta variant, pretty much what the virus is doing is that as it is mutating, as it is changing, it's getting smarter, it's getting more effective, and it's getting more impactful. And so we need to just know, like, as we continue to go up these letters in the variants, that this is things that we are expecting. We're expecting it to get stronger, wiser, and more severe as we go. And that's what we're seeing pretty much here. So for those people who are unvaccinated, we want you to take all the precautions, all the mitigation measures that you know about that we've been practicing for 16 months and really take it seriously because we are seeing increases in cases and we're seeing it, the transmission is happening at a quicker rate than what we have seen before.
Okay. Dr. Canterbury, I saw you nodding your head the whole time.
Yeah, spot on, honestly. Unfortunately, it's the more rural and underserved communities that will be targeted by this Delta strain. And so even though it's hitting everyone, they're the ones more susceptible to get these higher rates of transmission. So again, I'll reiterate to consider vaccinating yourself and protecting yourself going forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm not sure, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure what's going on. I can't see slides on my computer, haven't seen them all day. But one of the things that Dr. Rowley, who is the widow of Dr. Bill Jenkins, who was a whistleblower for the Tuskegee syphilis study, made very clear on a slide, and I liked it in my mathematical brain, my thinking about epi and biostatistics. Someone asked, like, what would he say about this vaccine? She just put out a mathematical equation. I was like, oh, thank you. And she said, Bill would say, the probability of harm from COVID, and you've talked about the long haulers and some of the unknowns there. She said the probability of harm from COVID does not touch the probability of harm from the vaccine. She said it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer, and that's what Bill would tell you. But as part of people's decision making, and I see it in the chat, where can they find out? Because this is kind of like the weight with the laws of justice, right? People have to weigh their own personal risks and benefits. I don't do germs on a regular day. So that was part of my decision making. So where can people find out about real-time side effects of the vaccine? And can you also tell people how that data gets collected and who can also add their data to that?
Sure, I'll start from the second part of the question and then work my way up to the front. So the way that we monitor, so I mentioned earlier that we monitor vaccines and other medications and just in general for potential adverse events and to see what the side effects are. And so there's the CDC has a tracker and it's called VAERS, VAERS. And what you do with this is that basically when you get your vaccine, you should also be told, like, if you have any, if you think that anything that happens is related to this vaccine, then just enter it into VAERS. And so this is what we call a passive surveillance system, which means that the CDC isn't actively like coming to you and saying, you got a vaccine, so tell me if you got any side effects, or tell me if there's anything that you think happened as a result of it. It's passive because the CDC isn't actively doing that. Instead, we're depending on people to go into the system and say, I had a headache 2 days post, or I had this happen post this. And then what you have is a bunch of epidemiologists on the back end like me. And what these epidemiologists are doing on the back end is that we're looking through all the data that people are entering in, and we're looking for trends. We're looking to see, is this something that's coming up more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times? Is there something that we need to zone into and say, this is happening more now than what we would expect in the normal population, right? And so that's our comparison group. Like, what would typically happen at this time? It's spring. Well, now it's summer, but let's say it's spring. And in the spring, we would expect allergies. We would expect people to have, runny nose or sinus headaches and things like that. So if we're seeing those things right now and people are reporting that in VAERS, we might not say, that's the side effect of, that's because of the vaccine. We're going to compare that to what we would normally expect. And if there's more, then we could say, oh, there might be an increased chance of this associated with the vaccine. And then we can start to study that more in detail. So this is what we're using our passive surveillance systems to do. And we're looking at it at a large swath of people. There's been over 100 million people vaccinated. So we have lots of data points to start to look at. And if we see something, then we jump right on it. And we start to figure out what is it that we need to do. Do we need a pause? Do we need to study more? Do we need to actually start to do something active? Do we need to actively collect data on these pieces in order to find out more about it? So that's how the data are collected and what we do with it.
There's a database if people want to find out about side effects called the Vaccine Adverse Effects Registry or Surveillance System. it's passive, meaning we can go in, and if I come home after I have a vaccine and I break out into hives, I can go into VAERS and say that I had hives. It could also be because it's spring in North Carolina and every good pollen on a good green planet is in this state, right? And so part of you pulling back the data is trying to see on a regular day, what does this look like? And in the midst of a pandemic or after getting a vaccine, what does this look like? And one of the examples a colleague gave me back in December, and then I would love to hear from you, Dr. Canterbury. Media is going to media, just like viruses are going to virus. And so the media came out and said, these people got Bell's palsy. And it was maybe 10 people out of 40,000. And this could be it could be temporary, it could be permanent. And so what he said was, just be smart about the headlines that you read, because on a regular day, your probability of getting Bell's palsy on a regular day outside of a pandemic is like 1 out of 10,000. And then he said, within this trial, before the vaccines were rolled out to us, when they sent you that headline, it was 1 out of 10,000. So there's no difference. There's no difference in risk on a regular day outside of a pandemic and being in a trial for the vaccine before it was rolled out to the public. Dr. Canterbury, anything else to add about side effects? Because they've been in the news, like heart attack, and there have been so many things, but we also know that heart attacks happen. They're very prevalent in this country. We're not the healthiest, but anything else you want to share for people to make an informed decision?
You know, I think the metaphor you just used was perfect, and just showing that sometimes there are things just meant for clickbait and just getting you to look at an article. And so it's harder for just someone who's not in this healthcare space or whatever space it is to really get the truth out of some of this stuff. And so if you have questions or you feel confused, ask someone that's trusted who's in this line of work. So I just implore people to just ask questions. This is how we get dialogue and things changed and perspectives learned. So I'm always about just spreading who's out there, and keep in mind what you're absorbing, because you may not know. There's a sliver of truth for so many types of misinformation out there. So just be mindful of what's going in and out.
Mm-hmm. We have about 10 more minutes. Dr. Chapel, I'm told your slides are up. You can do whatever you like to with your slides, and then we'll let Dr. Canterbury do whatever he does with his slides. I do want to be respectful of people's time. We want you to get the answers that you need. Are you guys okay with doing 8 minutes a piece with your slides? You can just flip through to the important ones. All right.
Yeah.
And let you do your thing.
I talked about a lot of these already, so that'll be easy. I also want to add just to the discussion we were just having. Earlier today, I had a conversation with a really close friend, and he asked me, he asked me a question about COVID, and the answer was really like detailed. I had to go into all the details of COVID in order to answer the question, because what happens is that these, as we were talking about media and clickbait, like there's enough of truth in the statement that makes everything else confusing, or at least that it makes you think that you understand enough about it, right? So what the conversation I had this morning was, he called me and said, I just read that, like, I don't know, something like 3,000 people who were fully vaccinated still ended up getting COVID. What's that about, right? And so I said, well, what's that about is an issue with the way that we've been talking about this virus. We haven't been clear that there is a virus and there is a disease. And we haven't been clear on what the vaccine is actually was tested to do. The vaccine was tested to see its efficiency and effectiveness in handling the disease, not the virus. And so when we talk about it and when we just say COVID and not clear that there's a virus called SARS-CoV-2, and it's different than the disease, which is COVID-19, and really kind of like breaking it apart into pieces and going into detail about one thing versus the other, it becomes really easy to read a headline and get confused, or even read an article and think that you've walked away with an understanding, when in fact, it's the details that matter. And so when I was talking to my friend, I was telling him, like, when we're thinking about the virus and we're thinking about virus progressing to the disease, the vaccine is there to help make sure that if in fact you do catch the virus, it does not then advance to severe disease. And this is what the vaccine does extremely well. And so I just wanted to, throw that in there, that sometimes you think you know enough because we read some things, but there's also some details behind the curtain that we might not know that will help make it all make sense. Mm-hmm. So feel free to ask questions, even about stuff that you think you already know.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like, for folks who aren't familiar with like virus and disease, that's kind of like the difference between HIV and AIDS, right? HIV is the virus that causes the condition AIDS. And so you're saying that coronavirus causes COVID. And that messaging being clearer would be very helpful. And I agree with you on that. Dr. Canterbury, I see you nodding your head. And then we can move over to your slides, because this turned into a question session, which is cool. That's what we're here for.
Okay, I'm going to be real quick, probably 3 minutes. Let's go. First slide.
La primera imagen.
So what I wanted to talk about is the fact that we probably are all really much suffering from COVID fatigue. We are tired of hearing about COVID, tired of thinking about COVID, tired of wearing our masks, tired of Zoom meetings, like just over it all, right? In the beginning, it was fun to go to a few Zoom birthday parties and to watch the Zoom battles. But now we're pretty much over it and want to have our hot girl summer that was promised to us, right? So I get it. I get that we are tired of COVID. Next slide. Especially when we see maps like this. So the way I want you to interpret this map is that the lightest green means really low rates of COVID. The dark blue means extremely high rates of COVID, right? So now we have this map where we have COVID in the US, and it's not just a feeling anymore. We look at maps, we look at our data, and we go, we're coming out of this. We have really low rates. Why should we still be concerned? Why are they still pushing mitigation techniques? Why are we pushing vaccine when COVID is really low right now in the US? Next slide. Well, the answer is because there's people like me, epidemiologists, who know that it's not just where we are today that matters, it's where we were last week and where we're going in the future that matters. And when we compare those really low rates of COVID that we see today to what we saw last week, our map looks different. We now see blues popping up all over this map that we didn't just see. So now we're seeing that there are things to be concerned about. Our rates are increasing. We need to be paying attention to COVID. It didn't just go away because we wanted to. It didn't go away because we want to have a great summer. That we are seeing upticks that we need to be concerned about. And those upticks are most likely a result of the new variants that we're coming into contact with. Next slide. And what I wanted to point out is that one of the things that our CDC director has said to us over multiple times is that, the magic number is 10,000. We want to get to less than 10,000 cases of COVID a day. And we did. We had about 4 days at the beginning of June where we had less than 10,000 cases a day. And that was beautiful. That was wonderful. However, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable alone, because we need to make sure that we're not just having low rates of COVID, but that we are, next slide, you can go ahead, that we are also doing the things that we need to do to keep COVID rates low, which is that we are vaccinating our population as well as doing some of those mitigation techniques that you heard me speak about. Currently, we only have 45% of Americans that are fully vaccinated. And if you look at this map and think about the map that I just showed you, the map of those who are fully vaccinated, the darker blues are up top and the lighter blues and the greens are down the bottom. And if you just think about the map that we just saw, where we're looking at where COVID is popping up again and our 7-day rates are increasing, it was basically a flipped map. We see that happening more in the places where we don't have high rates of fully vaccinated people. Next slide, please. The next slide will show that only about 54% of people have received at least one dose. And here, I wanted to make the point I already did, which is that having one dose is not good enough. We have variants that are smarter than our one dose. And so we need to make sure that we're going from the one dose thing to fully vaccinated in order to continue to see those rates go on a decline. Next slide. And what we're seeing is that we've really pushed vaccinations, and we pushed them hard. As soon as the vaccines came out, you couldn't get a vaccine fast enough. There were lines, people really wanted it. When I think about the things that people were doing for a vaccine back in February, it's really like, it's the stuff that that cartoons are made of. Like, it's just so funny that the lengths that people went to get a vaccine back in February, and the fact that we have tons of vaccine now, and that just today, I've only vaccinated 3 people, when in February, I would vaccinate about 700 people a day. And so, like, we have tons of vaccine available. People aren't coming now. The slope that is going down for the number of people getting vaccinated a day has dropped faster than the slope of people who were trying to get it in the beginning. So we know that
people were hopping on private jets going to cut the line for vaccine. Okay, carry on.
Right. And so what we can't do is put all our eggs in this vaccination basket. We can't. We know that hesitancy exists. We know that there are true concerns, and we also know that that there's a whole segment of the population that's not eligible for the vaccine. So we can't just say that our way out of this pandemic is to vaccinate everybody. That's not the case as it stands today. Next slide. So I talked a little about the U.S. approach. We took a let's slow the pandemic approach. Let's cope with the pandemic approach. The pandemic will always be here, and so what can we do to make life more bearable? The approach that we didn't take was a let's solve COVID approach. And me as an epidemiologist, my goal has always been to prevent illnesses and to eradicate diseases when at all possible. And we have seen other countries really take a let's solve COVID approach when we have decided that it is too costly for us to do that, or it takes too much work. And instead, what we really want to do is focus on individual behaviors, tell people what they should do, as opposed to working as a pandemic. A pandemic is something that impacts the population as a whole. So the solutions really need to be population-based solutions that help bring us out of this. And so the way that I really see this is that we should be taking a tiered approach, where it's what can individuals do at the same time as what can communities do, at the same time as what can the government do, what can we all do collectively in solidarity in order to end this pandemic. And so I want to leave you guys with a call to action, which is that I want you to consider getting vaccinated, but not just for yourself. I don't want you to think that your health is in your hands. That's not how we live as a society. The things that you do impacts your neighbor. The things that your neighbor does impacts you. We are in this together. So consider being vaccinated, not just for you, not just so that you can have long life, but how about for my kids? I have a 3-year-old, 6-year-old, and 9-year-old who are not able to get vaccinated because the vaccine is not available to their age group yet. They have to contend with the Delta variant, as a result of the virus continually to mutate. So how about, instead of let's just go with your health is in your hands, it's all about you, your decisions impact you, let's think about ourselves as a whole, as a collective. Your decisions impact that immunocompromised person who you sit next to on the bus that you don't even know. Your decisions impact the people in your church community. Your decisions impact us all as a whole. So as a whole, we should do things in solidarity with each other. Let's continue to take some of those non-pharmaceutical interventions and approaches that we know and love, washing our hands, making sure that we are avoiding crowded spaces, dealing with ventilation, keeping windows and doors open when you're in indoor settings, limiting indoors as much as possible until we can get to a point where we're at closer to herd immunity levels with our vaccine. That 45% is not going to keep us safe. And we're seeing that play out in real time. Okay, I'm passing the mic.
You dropped the mic.
Hey,
So one of the things that Dr. Barber said last time was that people had legitimate questions at the onset of this pandemic, genuine questions with the rollout of the vaccines. And she was like, they needed somewhere to get them answered. Like they were legit questions. And so I appreciate you saying, given the bigger picture, right, of it's no joke out here right now. We're on variant number 4. And also making sure you have the information that you need. And you just dropped, you can't see the chat right now, but people are like, OMG, yes, wow, when you guys are talking, because folks don't know until they don't know and won't get an answer if they don't ask. And I'm not a proponent of making any decision without my friends know. I'm probably the 4th or 5th person to do anything. I think that's so important as part of informed decision making. So thank you for sharing that. Dr. Canterbury, I love y'all, but I can't be on here all night, people. Dr. Canterbury, do you want to share your slides? What do you want to do? It's like we got about 8 minutes or so. Can you hear me?
Sorry, it lagged me out a little bit.
Oh.
I guess I am back in action.
You should see me looking at my screen. I was like, what is wrong? And folks, we probably have, wow, this flew by. I appreciate y'all accommodating the group. That's what this is about. So if you have slides, let's go for it. And if folks have questions, we'll take a few more. Okay, I'm moving, but I don't see you moving, Dr. Canterbury. Oh, you're frozen. Hey.
All right, I think
Okay.
I'm back.
All right. Oh, I think he's freezing. Okay.
Yeah, I know, right?
I think you're freezing a little bit.
I'm gonna stop sharing.
I think it's the lean towards. Well, if folks have a question in the interim, please do let us know. You know, one thing we haven't talked about, diet is part of non-pharmaceutical interventions. Like we talked about vitamin D, we talked about cardio. I guess I did say I kind of threw in there, but foods that also are rich and full of the same vitamins that we, the vitamin C, the zincs, the vitamin Ds are also as important for us to put in our bodies so that it's not a one-time pop-up, but always, every day, making sure that we're putting the right things in our bodies, even though donuts are so good, so good. Dr. Canterbury, if you're live, we'll take you. We're going to have to send out a post email with answers to questions, and I love that they're coming. Dr. Canterbury, if you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Oh, I think he's frozen. Okay. Might need to shoot him a text and ask him to log back in. Okay, he's coming back in. Take a little water break, folks. If you have a little water, it's good for your body. Hey, welcome back. We've been waiting for you.
And I will just breeze through these really quickly. Any.
This flew by, wow.
Yeah, or it's saying I can't share anything myself.
Team, can you guys advance the slides and then we can wrap this on up?
Yep.
I can't see folks. I want to say like, how you feeling? How you doing? How you doing? All right, we'll follow your lead.
Are y'all able to see the slide? Okay, there it is, coming up.
Thumbs up if folks see the slides.
All right, perfect. So just to start off with, I do not agree with the word vaccine hesitancy. I think it's more so like vaccine, I have questions. And it just means you just have an open dialogue about that. And the problem with that definition that's listed here is that it puts the onus on the patient to figure all this stuff out, when really we as a healthcare system hasn't done the best job in addressing why people may be having pause about getting vaccinated. But so if we're going to go off the traditional WHO definition, it's basically a delay or an acceptance or refusal of vaccinating despite it being potentially available. Next slide. And so based on the WHO's definition, there are 3 C's that really comprise what people may think or maybe reasons why they're hesitant. And it comes down to potentially confidence. Can I trust that this is a safe and effective vaccine for me? Convenience, as Dr. Chapel alluded to earlier, back in February, it was not easy to get access to this vaccine. Long calls, websites crashing. If it's not convenient, it's gonna make it much harder for someone to want to get vaccinated. And then of course there's complacency, where basically, is it really an urgent thing? Should I get this now? Should I just wait and see? And these are just different levels of what we consider vaccine hesitancy or vaccine, I have questions. Next slide. And so the history of vaccine hesitancy isn't anything new. It's been around for centuries. These pictures actually date back to the 1800s, where the first vaccine was developed for addressing smallpox. They even had pictures in newspapers talking about people will turn into cows if you get this vaccination. So this is human nature to have questions. And honestly, it can prey upon current anxieties and concerns, especially when it comes to complex and new diseases. Next slide. And so vaccine hesitancy, or I have questions, is really on a spectrum. You have the very, very few who are just deniers and flat out refusers, like anti-vax campaigns on the far right. And then you have those who just generally accept all vaccines on the far left. But most people are truly in the middle. It's a spectrum of, I don't know, I'll wait. Well, I heard one thing, so I'm not too sure. And it just fluctuates. And it's okay for things to fluctuate. However, we have shown that getting people vaccinated has saved millions of lives in preventative diseases across the world. Next slide. And so there are several barriers. We cannot downplay the fact that transportation was initially a barrier, along with systemic racism, lack of access, misinformation, and vaccine hesitancy. Not to mention COVID burnout and fatigue, as Dr. Chappell's aptly stated earlier. And so all these variables do play into your course of decision-making. Do I have PTO? Can I take off work? Will they be able to allow me to get vaccinated? These are things that people have to deal with. But unfortunately, we see strong differences for those who may be marginalized or don't have access to such tools in their communities. Next slide. And so let's go into the weeds. The truth is there are higher hospitalizations and deaths if you are of African-American descent, Black, Hispanic, or Native American, almost ranging from 2 times that of white counterparts and 3 times for hospitalizations. Next slide. When we start talking about Native American societies and cultures, 1 in 3, and at least the Navajo tribe, don't even have access to electricity. So how can someone enroll for a shot online? That also goes for running water and lack of internet access. We're even seeing those with a higher risk of diabetes, obesity, and heart disease within Native Americans. And they have a 23% chance of having smokers in their Native populations. So all these lifestyle factors we talked about earlier with diet and exercising can impact your outcomes if you were to actually get COVID. Next slide. Black Americans, again, overrepresent frontline and essential workers. And so it has been difficult for them to get off work and find a time to get vaccinated. And so we can't discuss health outcomes if we don't talk about social determinants of health. And these are the necessities in life, whether it be food, housing, transportation, whether it's spiritual wealth or a community to just support people, which has been shown to lead to better health outcomes. Missing any of those aspects can significantly reduce your chances of having greater outcomes when it comes to having COVID. Next slide. The same very much goes for Hispanic communities who may be likely to live in multi-generational households. And so it becomes a bit harder to socially distance in those places. And they also overrepresent our essential workforce and nearly a third of our agricultural workforce. That being said, it's going to be much harder for those who may not have citizenship, or they may have fears about potentially being deported. And so you have to have an open mind when it comes to people's perspectives, when it comes to why they may have pause about getting vaccinated. Next slide. And so we alluded to this a little bit about phase 1, phase 3 trials. But I want to emphasize that how these vaccines came about so quickly was because we did a lot of the steps at the same time, meaning those phase 1s to phase 3, we probably did like 1 or 2 together, and then eventually a phase 3. So this is what made the process move along a bit faster. However, we did not cut corners in the efficacy and safety of preparing these vaccines. Next slide. And so I wanted to mention Pfizer, of course, available for anyone 12 and up. It's one of those infamous mRNA vaccines, or the cheat code, I say, that's used to fight off the for COVID. Next slide. Moderna is also the second one that came to market. This one is spaced out by 28 days and has been shown to be about 94% effective. Next slide. Next slide again. And Johnson & Johnson is the one and done. Next slide. Pregnancy and COVID, there does seem to be some benefit for patients who may be expecting and getting vaccinated. Newborns have found to have some protective effects or antibodies from the COVID shot with nursing mothers, so they are recommended to get it. Next slide. Children, we've also had some great information as well, where we're seeing almost 100% efficacy, which I use that number with a grain of salt, but particularly there have been no hospitalizations or deaths for people who are children and vaccinated. And there'll be more to come in the future for other vaccines for children. Next slide. And so the variants, of course, are of concern, and Delta is a pretty big one that we're worried about. However, getting vaccinated is the best step next to those public health measures that Dr. Chapple mentioned that we can use without having a non-pharmacological intervention. Next slide. And so just to give you a snapshot, the world is still raging with COVID. It is not over. And so we have to be diligent and vigilant in the way we protect ourselves and our families, and see vaccinating yourself as a community effort and not just a one-size-fits-all approach. Next slide. This is showing the level of how many we've actually given across the world, and still a long way to go, particularly in South America and India, Southeast Asia, and Africa, which is actually soaring right now in COVID rates. Next slide. The knowns are, we have a long way to go to figure out everything about COVID, but we do know the risks of getting that shot versus not getting the shot and just getting COVID. And then you can move to the end. There are several unknown effects we talked about earlier. We could skip that. Boosters may come, but if there are any questions, we already addressed that. So pleasure to be here again. And I'll open the floor for you all, Dr. Bobby Banks.
7:30, gotta go. No, I'm just playing. This is why we have 90 minutes, it flies by. We have all of your questions in the chat. If our speakers are open to answering them, we're happy to send them out via email or do a quick video. Our design people are pretty tight on this end. I do want to be respectful of people's times. I have no idea what slide is up right now, but if it's the one that says what's next, we mentioned at the onset of this session that our partners at Ride United NC made this possible. They understood the importance of providing a space where people could get fact-based information and get their questions answered and clarified. And also, Dr. Canterbury talked about these social determinants of health, rooted in all of the isms you can think of. And one of them is transportation. And so if you are in a community where people need access to, want access to vaccinations, or they have an appointment coming up, there's an opportunity to get free round trip transportation through this initiative. Do not push or persuade or guilt people into vaccination. It is a personal decision. Our job is to really help provide them with the best information, not only for themselves, but for their community. You just saw data here that made it very clear. COVID is here, And we have to do what we have to do to protect ourselves and our communities. Dr. Chapel talked about her babies. I was just at a party this past weekend and I was kind of scared to hug the elderly people. So just thinking about the importance of this as a mitigation measure, and that many of us are in communities where we don't have access to so many things. And this is one way to help people get to their vaccination appointments. We'll be back in the same place in 4 weeks. We'll be here on the 4th Wednesday. Thanks again to our partners for making this available. You already have in your inbox. Check your email. We need to know how this is working. This is not about Bobby or her team. It's about this health literacy effort. What do you want more of? Apologies for the glitch. Hello. But we need to hear from you to know how to make these sessions informative and engaging for people so that they can get the information they need. Thank you so much. Hats off to our partners, Ride United NC. Hats off to the team who made this happen. Thank you for booting out the little who got in the room. Have a good week, everybody, and we'll see you next month. Stay in touch.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.